afternoon. My name is Susan Paris. I'm the director of Brattleboro Area Hospice, and I want to welcome you to My Heart Broke Open. Brattleboro Area Hospice is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. We were founded in 1979, so in November of 2009 is when we got our nonprofit certificate. So we created a number of events to celebrate that, and this is one of them. We're a volunteer hospice, which means we provide non-medical volunteer and bereavement support to anybody in Windham County. And now I want to introduce you to Elizabeth Pittman, who is our bereavement care coordinator and also is the visionary who created and also did the practical things to make this afternoon happen.
You know, I often say to people, and it's one of the reasons we created this set, that we want to make as comfortable an environment as possible for having this inherently uncomfortable conversation. So I'm glad you're making yourselves comfortable. Shakespeare wrote, "Give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak whispers the o'er-fraught heart and bids it break." And Molly Fumia adds, "For what remains unspoken can never burst into healing song." 9 years ago, a Deidre Scherer show opened at the museum, and Brattleboro Area Hospice took part in that show in several ways, including through a scrapbook made up of poems, journal entries, songs, pictures of gardens. All were inspired and created in response to heart-opening grief over the death of a loved one. Volunteering is another kind of heart-opening experience. Participants in tonight's unusual show include present and former volunteers, staff, clients, members of this community, and a couple of folks from the Greenfield area. And all of them have agreed to share with you their creative responses to these life-altering events. Thank you. I think we begin.
Even before Jimmy became a ghost, he practiced floating in his dark sweatpants and t-shirt, moving through the house on silent, fine-boned feet. We stayed inside the first week. He took a shower. I followed him up the stairs, preceded him down. He made his own way, hardly struggling. As public radio filled the rooms with morning pro musica, I poked into his life. He poked into mine. The silences that fell between our words felt comfortable. He laid his head on the kitchen table, his hand curled around a glass of orange juice. "This is perfect," he said. The birds came to Olga's house on that cold day in early March. Chickadees, blue jays, finches, mourning doves. They balanced and hopped, their movements quick as a heartbeat, as they fluttered and fed outside the big window, while Click and Clack quipped over the speakers, and then Michael Feldman asked, "What do you know?" Jimmy said, "I'm hungry." So I fixed him a snack, a milkshake with ice cream and a quarter banana, and Jimmy said, "This is good." But then he started those gut-wrenching hiccups, and in my heart I cursed the bananas and myself for doing that to him. I asked if they hurt, and he said, "No, these aren't bad." And for the moment, the bananas, at least, were redeemed. On the second visit, when he showered, he pulled himself up the stairs, struggling hard to clear each step He leaned on my shoulders on the way down, missing the last step and floating past me to catch himself on the chair. Baryshnikov could not have been any more graceful. Jimmy moved like a helium balloon, 8 hours old. I warmed my hands around a cup of hot water, then warmed the lotion between my hands, then rubbed and kneaded his pristine back, massaging as gently and firmly as his tender bones could bear. "I bet you can make a mean French braid," he said. He sat at the table, his hands resting in his lap. The brush slid through his fine, long hair with the slender ribbons of gray threaded through the black. My fingers traced lines gently across his scalp, gathering, crossing, gathering, crossing. With his hair pulled back from his face, his large eyes grew larger, his cheekbones cheekier. "I can't read anymore," he said, and I asked, "Would you like me to read to you?" He surprised us both when he said yes. He surprised me more when he asked for the book in my bag, rather than one of the hundreds lining the walls upstairs. Stone Fox, he wanted, a children's book. I'd read the book before. I knew how it ended. It had made me sob that first time. I got halfway through with Jimmy. He laughed, grimaced, listened to the trials of little Willie, his ailing grandfather, the faithful dog Searchlight. And then Jimmy slept, and I was given a reprieve. I did not have to read the bitter end to him. But Jimmy woke before I left. "Bring the book next time," he said. The third week, he was already showered and dressed when I came. He was groggy from morphine. "A pain there," he said, waving his hand toward his shoulder. Clark stirred cream of wheat at the stove, and Jimmy offered to bring me a seat to make 4 places where there were only 3. I said I would get my own chair, and he glared at me. Monsieur Gallant of the photograph in the living room, the photograph of a healthy Jimmy in a bathing suit, a cigarette burning between his lips, his face petulant as James Dean's. The family of 3, Olga, Clark, and Jimmy, spooned in breakfast from their papa, their mama, their baby bear bowls. Olga looked up from her place, studied Jimmy. "I'm not sure. If you look more like Charles Manson or Jesus," she said. And we all laughed because the truth was he looked a lot like both. Later, Jimmy and I walked outside. He sat on the stone circle smoking, then broke the cigarette apart. "Old marine trick," he explained. "Never leave a trace." I read a little more of Stone Fox to him. Jimmy nodded off. I read to the end, though he wasn't listening, because he wasn't listening. I wept silently over the death of Searchlight, and Jimmy woke to see my nose running, my eyes swimming. "Bring the book back," he whispered. I promised I would. The 4th week, Jimmy slept, with his back to me. His delicate shoulder and leg slipped out from under the chicken quilt. I covered him. He shrugged the blanket back off. Stone Fox waited in the bottom of my bag, along with 2 pairs of sterile gloves and my emergency numbers. I had a cold that week, but would not cough in this house. I did not want to make them sick, to make him sick in his last days. Before I left, I bent over him and kissed his forehead. I coughed the whole way home, my tires slipping in the mud, dodging the ruts of Baker Brook Road. The 5th week was the last. I knew when I saw him. He no longer looked like Charles Manson, only Jesus. He was floating as he slept, floating when he woke. Once he looked at me, his dark eyes widened. He smiled fleetingly, and I smiled back. "What?" he whispered. "It's good to see you," I said. And then he was gone again, turning back toward the big window, floating above the dark plaid sheets, leaving barely a trace. I sat on the stool by the bed, dabbing water on a cloth to wet his parched lips. I talked to him without speaking, wishing him a good passage. Mostly, there was silence. Stone Fox lay forgotten in my bag. As I watched, the birds came to Olga's house on that warm day in late April. Chickadees, blue jays, finches, mourning doves. They balanced and hopped, their movements quick as a heartbeat as they fluttered and fed outside the big window. Even before Jimmy became a ghost, he practiced, floating through me, moving into my heart on silent, fine-boned feet.
This poem came out of my work last year with a local writing group and many years of longing. The writing prompt came in the form of a large sheet being opened up on the floor. It was covered with a hodgepodge of items, including a number of sun-bleached bones and skulls. It happened to be February 13th, the 58th anniversary of my father's death. I never knew him. I was in utero when the Army Air Corps jet he was piloting crashed into the mountains of Anchorage, Alaska. I dedicate this poem to him and my mom. Her loss is even greater. She knew him and loved him for almost 8 years. Would his bones be white? Would the wind whistle through their open spaces? Would they rattle with my heart-heavy footfalls on the ground above? Would they swell with my tears and reach for me with sinewy arms of love and longing? In dying, did his soul hold itself together, though his bones were shattered and catapulted to the wind? Or is his young soul lost and fragmented as well, seeking solace, desperate to be fully felt and known? If I travel to the grave of his bones, if I listen hard enough, will I hear his voice there in the marrow? I will lie down upon his earth home, press my ear to the 58 years of soil between us, and know him.
"1 a.m. The last evening, it was just you and me. You were unguarded, anxious, in control, drifting between being alert and asleep and completely unafraid. Your arm itched. We thought if I filed your nails, it would prevent you from scratching too hard on your papery skin, but there was no nail file. You reached in the drawer next to the bed and pulled out the key to your apartment in the assisted living community, 2 floors above and down some long corridors from where you lay in the facility's ironically named health center. The nail file is in the upper right-hand corner of my bureau, you said, gesturing with your hands. It's in a little nail kit next to my handkerchiefs. Up I went, the dutiful daughter, letting myself into the familiar apartment, so infused with the essence of you that I felt that you were in it, not in that hospital bed in the sterile room below. I drank in the homey smell, the comforting sight of the yellow brocade chairs, and the polished wood coffee table where I had scratched my name on the underside one rainy Sunday afternoon, decades before. I headed to your bedroom, past the wall covered with photos of us, your 3 children, your grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and your husband, my daddy, who had been dead for 31 years. I opened the drawer to the bureau and reached in to find the nail file exactly as you had described, tucked in amongst neat piles of folded white hankies and pale blue nightgowns. On my way back, the other residents were assembling for dinner, and I tried to scurry quickly through to get back to you, to protect your desire for privacy, and to not have to say out loud what was happening. But there was one woman, someone I recognized whose name I couldn't remember, who caught me with a question about you. She's on hospice, I said. She's no longer in any pain. She's conscious and alert, and I'm just on my way back to her. It was only 2 days before that a woman from hospice had come to do an intake. You had seemed relieved, almost proud. I'm on hospice, you had said that day to the only one of your friends you allowed to visit. At the end, you wanted just family there. The woman in the hallway squeezed my hand. "Give her my love," she said. Back down the stairs and through the double doors, I made my way to your room. "Where were you?" you asked. "I missed you." Your words matched your gaze. All day you had been looking straight at me, with your clear blue eyes wide with wonder and love. It seemed like you were looking into and through me to something that I couldn't see. "I went to get the nail file," I said, "remember?" You nodded and offered your hand. I filed your nails. You still itched. I noticed red marks on your dry skin from where you had scratched before. I called the nurse. "I can't give her anything more," the nurse said. "It might kill her." You, of course, would have liked that, a little extra help on your journey out of this world. At 91 years old, after a full and family-centered life, suffering from pain, a massive abdominal blockage, no longer eating and drinking, you were ready to go. But you had to do it on your own. Soon you fell asleep. I sat in the chair next to your bed as the June night darkened outside the window. You lay motionless under the thin white blanket, your breathing barely perceptible. Finally, I rose and stood by your side. I kissed you on the forehead, stroked your hair, held your hand. I realized that if the nurse could not offer any medicinal help, I could offer something. A few days into this week of your dying, I had gone to a local bookstore and found a book about the dying process. I had read that sometimes people needed help letting go. You've been a loving mother, a wonderful grandmother and great-grandmother, I said as I gazed at your sleeping face. You raised us well. You took great care of us. We love you, and we are all in good shape. I paused and leaned in closer. My next words came out as the merest of whispers. You can go now. I turned and left and drove the winding country road back to my brother's house where he and my sister-in-law were waiting. We ate a late dinner and went to bed. At 1 a.m., the phone rang.
Shooting Star by Lucy Basil. I saw a shooting star last night. I will never forget, never forget. I saw a shooting star last night, big and bright, gracefully arching in the dark night sky. Leading where? Leading where? I saw a shooting star last night, showing the way with brilliance, a sparkling tail flowing behind it, leading into mystery, into infinity. I saw a shooting star last night, leaving us, leaving us. I saw a shooting star last night. He knew I had come to say goodbye, to say thank you, to say I love you. I saw a shooting star last night. He said that it takes hard work to be family, to be a bright star. But he had led. We were to follow. To be a strong family, to sparkle, to gracefully arc. Within hours of our talking, of our holding hands, within hours of our hugs, I saw a shooting star last night. The second set features Bettina Berg's retelling of her first volunteer experience. And a bit later on in the set, another piece she wrote soon after we all received the shocking news of our volunteer Ed Sofke's death. Susan Paris will read two poems by volunteer C.L. Tewksbury, and former hospice care coordinator Cheryl Richards will read a prose piece by Katie Merriam. Though CL and Katie couldn't be with us this weekend, we're grateful that they wanted their pieces to be included tonight in memory of CL's husband, Henry, and Katie's husband, Bill.
Beginnings. My first hospice client was a gentleman in his mid-70s who was not able to drive any distance and yet had decided to continue treatments at Dartmouth. Our first meeting was to be at the Putney General Store for coffee before we committed to weekly round-trip car rides to Hanover. I was wearing a bright red jacket that winter, a short-lived period of trying on color. I got a coffee and sat down to wait. People around me chatted, and it occurred to me how much like a blind date this situation was. I was watching for a bald man alone whom I didn't know, not always easy at the general store, and he was looking for a woman in her 40s sporting a red ski jacket. The difference with our date was that we knew how our relationship would end. No one approached, and I knew in my gut that he was not going to show. I finished my coffee and went out onto the front porch to use the payphone and called. No, he wasn't up to the visit, but he was sure we would do just fine the next day when I picked him up. When I did arrive the next morning, I was feeling nervous about many things. We got underway, and he informed me that I might have to pull over if he needed to have a bowel movement, though that's not exactly how he said it. His statement gave me something new to worry about, how such a situation would work, but more importantly, it shifted my attention from me and my worries about my capabilities to him and the seriousness of what he was facing. Despite my anxieties, the trip went without incident. Over the 6 months that we were together, we made many trips and racked up thousands of miles. We talked, listened to music, watched the changing of 3 seasons, and loved the beauty in each one. We learned about each other and helped each other as clients and volunteers do in that odd way that blurs the line of who's really doing the giving. He was accomplished, well-traveled and well-read. He had a wealth of life experience that he enjoyed talking about, and he loved his family, his friends, and me. His ex-wife, who was still very much a part of his life, assured me that he had not always been as easygoing as the man who I knew, and I believed her. But when I met him, he was approaching the end of his life and had little time or energy to waste on what might be called the small things. And yet, it was certain small things that brought him great joy. A midday drive up a Scutney Mountain to share a takeout lunch, sitting in a booth at Hojo's with his favorite treat, ginger ale with a scoop of vanilla ice cream. Those were 2 simple yet delightfully savored times. I was not at the hospital when he died. It was where he wanted to be. His family had gathered, and I felt that I had seen him along well enough. Nori, the care coordinator at the time, suggested that it may have been easier for him to go without me there. She may be right. I think of him with thanks more often than I could have predicted that day that Nori called with my first volunteer assignment. He was, and he would chuckle at my saying this, a good fellow.
One Letter by C.L. Tewksbury. If I could write so many letters asking for forgiveness, saying I was thoughtless or uncaring, vicious or unkind, but if it were one slim letter, one fragile piece of paper, only time enough for that, then I would write to you. I would write to you again as I did 2 years before you died. If there was presentiment that birthed those words, it was unaccepted in my mind. I said then all the things that so often I forgot to say, all the truths and the sweet substance of our days. I left the house while you were reading and walked out across the field. When I turned back upon the path, I saw you waiting, the sun glancing off the high forehead that I love so well. Your worn hands dangled at your side, your wispy hair lifted by the wind, your face unhidden in its weeping, and my letter, held loosely in your fingers, brushed the grasses of the field. We stood there, the summer wheat between us. All that needed writing had been written. All that needed saying had been said. If I could write you now, it would be for reassurance, wanting you to tell me that I am doing my days well, that I am living them in ways that have some substance, and that I am making meaning out of madness. Yet, it isn't what I would write to you, it is what I would wish you could write to me. Or perhaps just your hands, resting on my shoulders, would tell me that I have stood well and good within your sight.
Finding the Pieces by Katie Merriam. After Bill passed away, I found that the masculine presence was gone from our home. There were no men's clothes in the wash. My 10-year-old son felt a shift to the feminine side in the house. He was outnumbered by me and his sister, caught in a girl world of vegetarian meals and romantic comedies from the video store. No one else wanted to watch football. And I found myself in a ghetto of women and children. Female friends called me and took me to lunch. I saw the mothers of my children's friends. I felt a longing for deep voices. I began to page through the Land's End khaki section just to see pants. I became more attuned to what was happening around me, like a blind person noticing more of what can be heard. I took full advantage of brief visits from men that gave me a pale glimmer of the guy things I treasured about my husband. One man smelled of sweat and diesel as he talked to me about my tractor. I breathed deep and appreciated. One old friend walked with me down the street and carefully placed me on the inside, away from the cars. Gentlemanly, and a reminder of the way Bill insisted upon opening the door for me, even when he was very sick, made me feel like a lady. I miss these things from my marriage relationship, and now here was a way to savor a bit of it. One Saturday morning, I found myself at the hardware store very early. Whoa, it was almost all men. They were busily planning big projects, talking how to and being competent. Beards, overalls, boots, tools. Now I know where and when to go if I just want to walk with the herd. Then there were the intellectual interactions that I missed. Bill and I talked endlessly and chewed over politics, religion, science, business, culture, ideas, and family concerns. As he became sicker, I would read to him novels and philosophy at first, and finally poetry. So I needed to have some conversation that would satisfy me. And it began to happen. An old friend dropped by and we talked about history. I had a chat with another friend about books we had been reading. All I had to do was to be available when the opportunities arose. And I needed to get out and visit friends. If I wanted this, I would have to take time for friends more than I ever had before. So I'm trucking on through life, gathering my fragments and pieces of a satisfying life. But there is a big, gaping hole I can't plug. Yeah, the intimacy thing. No, I don't mean a romantic sexual thing. I'm still in love with my deceased husband. I mean the closeness of two friends sharing secrets, the give and take of chess players silently brooding over a move, or the exhilarating rapport of a chamber music group that is really together and playing well. I needed some connection. Well, I told myself, friends are people who do stuff together. So get out there and do stuff. There is still a missing member of my family. I'm very sad without my husband. But I am surviving by seeking the components of our relationship elsewhere. The distributed marriage? No. I don't think I'm doing anything other than noticing when something is satisfying. My antennae are up. A small conversation can make my day. I'm seeing things I wouldn't have noticed before, little things that remind me of Bill. Someone who is a steward of the land. Bill was. Someone who greets his wife with a kiss at a school picnic. Bill would. Someone who is thinking through all of the details of a house being built. Bill did that. Bill isn't here to thump into the house carrying firewood, watch cowboy movies, or hold my hand. I can only find the pale fragments, fractured pieces of his wonderful qualities, the things that I loved in others in my life. They are here. I just need to keep my eyes and my heart open.
In our last set, before intermission, we get to hear Kathy Hess's song, Cosmic Riddle. This song was recorded for us to use in the show at the museum that I mentioned earlier. And I've since played this song as inspiration for writing in groups we offer. So you will hear a line from the song echoed in Barb O'Callahan's poem that is dedicated to her daughter, Amanda. We will open the set tonight with Jordan Jangro reading The Worst Day Ever, written when she was 11 in loving memory of her mother, Carol. Jordan is now an extremely busy and soon-to-be graduate from BUHS, and prompted by filling out college applications, she has recently written another piece about her mom. A piece called, She Was the Change I Wanted to Be in the World. Jordan's piece will be followed by Ami Maglin's story poem, Rolling into 5 Years, dedicated to the memory of her daughter, Michelle. And after Kathy's song and Barb's poem, we will all have an opportunity to hold in memory someone dear who has died. I'll demonstrate that when the time comes. First, Jordan.
The worst day ever. Today was like any other sunny winter day. Even though my mother had been sick for 7 years, I would have never thought that today would change my life forever. I was standing outside school wondering, where is my dad? He should have been here by now. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Lori, my neighbor, waving for me to come over to her small-sized green car. As I strolled over, I noticed her eyes were kind of red and puffy, but I didn't say anything. She told me that she needed to take me home now. I just hopped in the car. I asked her, "Where's my dad?" She sighed, "Oh, he's busy." That sounded normal to me, because my dad is usually busy. The car ride went quickly. Before I knew it, I was already stumbling up the ramp to my house. I noticed 2 strange lines in the fluffy white snow going up the ramp. I opened the front door. I wondered if my mom had gone for a walk and the lines were from her walker. As I casually walked in the front door, I noticed that the living room where my mother would sleep was bare and that Pastor Bill was sitting in the kitchen. I still didn't think anything was unusual. So I said hi to the pastor, and then I saw my dad. He told me in a stern voice, "I need to talk with you in the office." He took me to our office, hesitated, then said, "Your mother died unexpectedly today." For a second I was silent. Then my heart started to beat like a drum, harder and harder, faster and faster. It hit me. That was it. She's gone forever. Now as I sit in my living room, I remember her in that morning when The last thing we said to each other was, "I love you." I also remember that beautiful sunny day turning into a hurricane in my soul. Now I know that every day is different. My second piece, as Elizabeth had mentioned, I wanted to write about how my mother's death had changed me and how I grew from it. And I felt in a way that she impacted me more as a mother being deceased than most mothers do while they're alive. So, she was the change I wanted to be in the world. My mother always said that when it comes to life, be genuine. I've never had a more perfect role model since. Growing up, I was a brat. There are no two ways about it. I was the poster child for spoiled. I have always been the baby, though I have older siblings from my parents' past relationships. Whether it was toys or my parents' attention, my needs came first. It was quite the reality check when one January afternoon, I came home to find my house slightly bare. It wasn't a lack of furniture or even that anything had been moved. There wasn't the same presence I felt earlier that morning. Never again would I look into my father, see the look that I saw in my father's eyes than I had that day. My mother was my champion, and though I never showed her much, I was rooting for her. Ever since I could remember, my mother had always been sick. I used to believe that having a sick mom was normal, although thinking back, I don't remember any of my friends' parents being that way. Frequent hospital visits and calls to the emergency room were weekly occurrences. Even though my mother was always sick, losing her never occurred to me. I can remember very clearly worrying my father would die, seeing he was much older, and my mom would just one day get better. That day never had a chance to come. My mom died when I was 11. Looking at her casket from across a room full of people, I made a silent vow to myself. From that day forward, I made the effort to portray the best version of myself that I wanted other people to recognize. For my mother, that seemed almost effortless. I guess when I got into high school, I received my second reality check. That vow wouldn't be so easy to fulfill. My junior year of high school, I had my heart broken, and for a long time afterwards, I pitied myself. I'm not one who feels pity, so for me that was a very bad time in my life. I felt like my character had gone under a huge microscope, and my whole safety bubble had been popped. Up to that point, I lost my mom, and I loved her deeply, sure, but I wasn't in love with her. I had no clue about boys, or love, or even petty high school drama. I just made an effort to cope with death, and there isn't even a correct way for that. Little did I know at the time, even though it was just a year ago, that out of all my critics, I was the hardest on myself. That's one of the characteristics I got from my mom. Even though towards the end of her life she wanted me to remember her as a good mom, she didn't have to try much for me to have that impression. My mom was in a class by herself. She was my mentor and the driving force in my life. How I wish you could only see the impact she has had and continues to have on me. But that's just the woman she was.
My daughter made the mistake of using heroin for some months when she was 20. She didn't use it again for 3 years before wanting to take a break from reality, before using it twice again. The second time she took a vacation, she didn't come back. My daughter Michelle left her body on a Monday. It was March 21st, 2005. She was 1 month shy of becoming a 24-year-old. The following piece is about Michelle, who has moved on, and about me, who is one of many left behind to grieve. Rolling into 5 years. It's almost been 5 years. The wave begins to roll. Around a corner, up over the ridge, in mid-sentence, unfolds a horizon of hills lined in burned peach early sunset that suddenly, unpredictably, pulls hot tears down my cheeks because of you. Because of you, family photos line my shelves and tables and walls where shadows were. Because of you, I wear Care Bear socks and carry a Tinkerbell bag with makeup and wear a yellow submarine t-shirt to bed. I watch a beautifully sad movie. I cry. I sob harder. I wail harder still. Suddenly, predictably, I am falling into a deep well. Because of you, it is time to grieve. I wrap myself in a prayer shawl knitted by church ladies to stop the shaking, and stand on what is now your son's bench. Fingers find an unscented white candlestick and matchbook in the box below the shrine up on the wall. The blunt end of the candle drips wax into the glass heart candle holder on the shelf, and the steadied candle flickers as the used match makes its way into the ashen pottery bowl. The lit hard cedar stick smells sweet for a few moments. A lavender incense stick is lit into its tiny holder. My fingers robotically pull out a red and gold square of origami paper and a black felt-tipped pen. I place the paper white side up on the world map surface above the bench and kneel on a second soft prayer shawl to write to you. A square box of soft tissues nearby slowly empties as I come to the conclusion that I'm glad you're flying free. I fold your letter methodically into a crane and carefully squeeze it inside the white ceramic heart box housing your remains. I smell the lavender incense that has burned down to ash and feel a moment of peace for both of us. I hold a piece of your bones before replacing the angel-topped cover, and like the deepening of conscious to unconscious breath during meditation, my stinging tears now steadily flow in cool silence. I light the sage stick and circle its smoke around the shelf and my head and know that it's almost done. The candle burns. I honor the brevity of your departure by acknowledging the drama of your life. I acknowledge that you breathed God in, stretched through your skin, and held your breath to keep anyone from knowing you were the goddess. I acknowledge that you poured yourself out from an endless well of abandonment that you kept full with eternal hope. I acknowledge the distance it took for you to see each of us for who we are and accept us anyhow. I honor the brevity of your departure and the depth of your life by coming to know the drama of my own.
You are walking through a doorway. First I see you, then I don't. Your voice says, please don't hold on now. Mine says, I promise that I won't. There are questions with no answers. Sometimes what's done is done. There are choices we are not given, and this was one. So write me a cosmic riddle and remind me to be kind, and I'll do my best to fill with good things the space you left behind. You come visit when I'm dreaming, full of pleasure at what you found. I thought you would need my comfort. I find it's the other way around. So lay a blessing on my shoulders. Lend me faith that will not break. Come and laugh inside my heartbeat now and then when I am awake. And teach me a cosmic riddle to remind me to be kind. And I'll do my best to fill with good things the space you left behind. There are questions with no answers. Sometimes what's done is done. There are gifts I have been given, and you are one.
To fill the space you left behind with good things, that is truly my goal. Right now, sorrow's grip is too tight, and some days I can't even breathe. Your memories are so bittersweet. Our home is so full of you. Everywhere, your photos, your gifts. I can see you sitting in the kitchen. I can hear your car in the driveway. I hear, "Hi, Mom." I know at night, when the lights are off, I know you're here. I miss you all day long, and I wait for you in my dreams. You are too much to lose. The space is so big.
At the end of yoga class, we lay down on our backs and basically relax, encouraged to melt and deepen and open our hearts. The second piece was written just after one of those meditations. It's called Dead Man's Pose. I close my eyes to rest, and in my silent well of being, I learn again, for the first time, that she has died. I scream, a woman wailing a monsoon in India. I scream, a woman rocking at the Wailing Wall. I scream, a woman desperately scratching at a pine box in Africa. I scream loudly, Each time I lay in my stillness, tears gently filling my ears. But for her, my darling girl, forever young, death came but once, followed by light, by learning, by love, by peace. For her, there is peace.
And now, we've had our own losses evoked. And I'm going to teach you a short memorial mudra that C.L. Tewksbury created for her sister, whose daughter died, and also for the daughter of that young woman who died. And a mudra is simply meaningful hand gestures that go along with a poem. So I'm going to say the poem, I'm going to show you the hand gestures, and then I'm going to get you to join in. We'll do it a few times together. So the poem is, we ask that our minds be a still vessel to hold their memory. May our hearts be open to the joy of their presence and the sorrow of their leaving. Give their spirits wings to fly, that their journey bring them safely home. And it goes like this. We ask that our mind be a still vessel. You make a vessel and bring it to your heart to hold their memory. And then you're going to cross your hands and bring them together like this. May our hearts be open to the joy of their presence and to the sorrow of their leaving. And then with your palms facing out, link your little fingers and put your thumb and second finger together. Give their spirit wings to fly, that their journey bring them safely home.